Welcome to Whiskey Politics with Dave Sussman, episode 127. I'm your host, Dave Sussman, and thanks for joining us at America's Voice Television Network, which you can find on Dish. You can also find our video series on YouTube and our audio podcast on every podcast application, as well as ricochet.com. If you're listening on iTunes, please take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a comment. You can also find me at David Sussman on Twitter and find the Whiskey Politics page on Facebook. Today's interview was filmed a few weeks ago at the American Freedom Alliance day-long event on gun violence and our culture, and it's a special twofer episode. First up is Evan Sayet, who, among many things, discusses how he believes the left is at the point of their endgame. We talk culture, politics, and Donald Trump. Evan Sayet is a comedian, an author. Interestingly, Evan used to be a liberal, writing for the Arsenio Hall Show and Bill Maher before turning to the right. Since then, he's become one of the nation's leading conservative political comedians, as well as a highly respected political pundit. His lecture to the Heritage Foundation remains 10 years later by far the single most viewed lecture in that organization's storied history. Evan's also a speechwriter for President Donald Trump, and author of the best-selling book, The Kindergarten of Eden, How the Modern Liberal Thinks. And then we chat with Mark Tapson, who is a Shillman Journalism Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, where he focuses on the politics of popular culture. He is a longtime regular contributor to The Federalist, PJ Media, The New Criterion, Big Hollywood, Town Hall, and other places. He has made television appearances on CNN, Glenn Beck, as well as many radio and public appearances. Mark discusses how today, the code of chivalry that many of us men were raised to practice has now become, quote-unquote, toxic masculinity. We talk about whether society no longer need alpha males, and another new term in this age of identity politics, benevolent sexism. We also touch on why multiculturalism is an anti-Western movement, and why the war on masculinity is the most important cultural issue of our time. So pour yourself your favorite drink, sit back, and enjoy the Whiskey Politics interviews with Evan Sayet and Mark Tapson. I'm here with Evan Sayet, an author, a speaker, a great guy, and a good friend. How are you, my friend?
That's as lovely an introduction as I could get. I appreciate that.
We're here, obviously, today. We're talking about, obviously, the tragic shootings that are going on in the schools. But you have, and you and I have talked about this at length, you have a perspective on culture at large, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the issues that are happening in culture. What are your thoughts on what's going on right now?
Well, look, it can't be guns, because America has always been a gun culture. There used to be shooting clubs in schools. You know, people brought their guns to schools because afterwards they would go out hunting. I mean, the guns are not new to America, but these mass shootings suddenly are. All right, so you have to ask yourself what has changed, and everybody knows. It's funny because I'm writing my next book, and it's about the modern liberal era, which is post-World War II through today. Right. In other words, the first babies born after World War II. In other words, the baby boomers and the subsequent generations. And everybody recognizes, whatever the subject is, whether it's about the breakup of the social fabric, like Robert Putnam's book, whether it's about the entertainment industry, like Michael Medved's book, everybody recognizes that something changed in the 60s when the babies born after World War II became the children of the 60s, became teenagers and grown-ups in the 70s, and suddenly people started to notice this thing called narcissism. Right? Thomas Wolfe, who just passed, yep. He called it the me decade. Mm-hmm. Christopher Lasch wrote a book called The Culture of Narcissism. And this narcissism continued to grow with each successive generation to the point where Dr. Jean Twenge says we now have a narcissism epidemic. All right, so it is narcissistic to kill people. It is the ultimate act of narcissism, to take somebody else's life for your own glory or to satisfy your own pain or whatever it is. So first and foremost, this culture of narcissism has to be addressed. And we have to ask ourselves, where did it come from? And then how can you address it? It's really a mental illness. Well, people don't kill other people.
I received an email from a listener who asked how we get such interesting guests on our show. First, Our intrepid producer, Melissa, is amazing. And secondly, we are in a new age where content is no longer controlled by biased corporations who decide what you should hear. At Whiskey Politics, our focus is the long-form discussions with brilliant minds, insiders, and newsmakers who, whether you agree with their politics or not, all have had an impact on our culture, politics, and society. It's truly an honor to have these conversations, as it's our little way we can make an impact. Hearing from listeners who tell me they have a new perspective on things just for listening to our series is truly heartwarming. If you wish to meet many of our guests, I always recommend coming out to the different conferences we attend, like America's Freedom Alliance. Our next big one will be at this summer's Freedom Fest. Freedom Fest 2018 will be held July the 11th through the 14th at the Paris Hotel in Las Vegas, and the Whiskey Politics team will be back on Media Row interviewing the luminaries insiders we've either had on our show or are welcoming on for the first time, many of whom you watch and read. I'll also be speaking and moderating some panels. Some of the speakers will include Candace Owens and Charlie Kirk, John Stossel, Nick Gillespie, Jennifer Grossman, Grover Norquist, Heather McDonald, George Will, Deneen Borelli, Judge Andrew Napolitano, Steve Forbes, Larry Elder, John Mackey, Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Lowry, and dozens more. Registering for Freedom Fest provides you access to the intellectual debates. Sometimes they get quite heated. Panels and speeches with leaders in their respective fields. And you'll also be able to attend the award-winning Anthem Film Festival. It's the world's only libertarian film festival, which is included in the fee. So join us at this year's Freedom Fest and stop by the Whiskey Politics booth on Media Row to say hello. If you register now, get your tickets at freedomfest.com and use the code WHISKEY100. You'll save yourself $100. That's right. Register at freedomfest.com. Make sure you use the coupon code WHISKEY100. Again, freedomfest.com, WHISKEY100, and we'll see you there.
Now, you're studying this, and you're obviously writing your book as you're looking into all of this. You go back to the 1960s, you talk about the elitism that's out there. Maybe it started with our schooling or academia, whatever it is. But if you were to point out right now, and you were to point out specifically where in our culture is this coming from?
Yeah. It's actually the rejection of culture. You see, starting in the first babies born after World War II became the children of the 60s, who then became the powers that be in the 1980s. Right? They wanted this revolution. Remember, the 60s was a whole revolutionary time. They were blowing up buildings. William Ayers was blowing up buildings. They were kidnapping people like Patricia Hearst. They were rioting in the streets. They were putting guns to college professors' heads. Right? But that revolution failed in that version. So what they did was they segued into the institutions themselves. So William Ayers, instead of blowing up people's bodies, are now destroying their minds as professors. All right, Angela Davis, instead of killing cops, is killing education as a professor. They segued into the positions of what I call the culture-creating industries. All right, entertainment, news, journalism, journalism being news. What am I leaving out? Academia and Democratic Party politics. Right. And when they became the powers that be, they taught their revolution via these institutions, and their goal is to destroy society. It's to overthrow society. You know, I don't want to give away the name of my next book, but it literally is about how they seek to revert mankind back to Adam and Eve, because that was the last time there was a utopia. All right, and if you listen to the songs that came out of the 60s, the song Woodstock, named after Woodstock, about Woodstock by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. You don't get more modern liberal icon.
Well, it's an utopian, right? and if you have a utopia, that means everything's going to be fine. But the problem is that human nature doesn't support utopia.
Well, my argument is I think that's the entire point of the story of the Garden of Eden to begin with, was that if even God, with only a society of two, could not maintain this utopia because man's nature is to seek knowledge. Well, how is any human being or oligarchy going to maintain a utopia with a population of 10 million, 100 million, a billion? And the answer is only through growing and growing totalitarianism, more and more government control over the individual. So the irony is this utopian ideology that was supposed to be free, let it all hang out, requires bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger government that has to be more and more and more oppressive. And that's what we see. We see, in fact, political correctness is newspeak. It is the same thing. Right? In Orwell's 1984, I think it's Winston, Winston Smith, the protagonist who says it. But he says, do you recognize that Newspeak is the only language ever in all of human history that gets smaller with each year? That fewer and fewer words are allowed to be said? Well, that's no longer true. PC is now the only real language ever to get smaller and smaller and smaller. You're not allowed to say this word, but what happens is, so another word takes its place that isn't quite as accurate. But everybody knows that means that, so now they have to outlaw the second word. And so that third word comes in, which isn't quite as accurate. But now they have to outlaw that word until they've outlawed every single word, but the one word they want you to be allowed to say. I'll give you a very quick example. Illegal aliens is an absolutely accurate definition of what these people are. They're illegal and they're alien to the United States. But aliens sounds like, they're from Mars or something. We might want to kill them. We yahoos. We better change that to immigrants. Now the problem is, they're not all immigrants. They come and many go back. So it's not as accurate a word. But now they have to change the word illegal. So now they're undocumented immigrants. So now it's even further from what they are. But even that still sounds so bad. So now they're undocumented workers. But many of them aren't workers. Some of them are workers, but some of them aren't workers. It's an inaccurate word to replace an accurate word. And you just have to keep replacing words until you finally get to, hey, aren't foreigners great?
A lot of that stems from you talk about political correctness, and that comes from the culture and the folks that are controlling culture. And you are ensconced in culture. And to go back to your long storied resume, you wrote for Bill Maher. You write speeches for the president.
Right. Isn't that wow? What a transition from having written politically incorrect with Bill Maher when I was still on the left to writing for Donald Trump.
And you made that transition from the left. But so you have seen it. You've been ensconced in the culture. Where does this drive? You talk about wanting to lead us towards utopia, Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden, and so on. But this instilled nature of this perversion of how we speak today, where does that come from?
Yeah, it comes from a desire to so eliminate knowledge or even the quest for knowledge. When I say the Garden of Eden, I don't mean just sitting in a lovely garden and being nice to each other. The key to the Garden of Eden was naivete and ignorance. They lost paradise when they ate the apple and gained knowledge of good and evil, right and wrong, better and worse. And so, in fact, the name of my first speech that made me so famous that I gave to the Heritage Foundation was Regurgitating the Apple, How the Modern Liberal Thinks. That if we lost paradise, just like if a 5-year-old child loses that innocence and that fun and that perfect 5-year-old kindergarten life when he starts to learn about the real world. Adam and Eve lost paradise when they started to learn about the real world. The key to this paradise, to regurgitating the apple, is to undermine your recognition of what the real world is, to a point where you don't even try to seek knowledge anymore, where the quest for knowledge is an evil act.
Who is the beneficiary of that?
Well, it's going to be this oligarchy of elite who are so good and pure that they will reign over us like Big Brother. I mean, people as good and pure as Barack Obama. And if this sounds a bit far-fetched, Evan Thomas was watching a speech by Barack Obama, and he said on Chris Matthews' show, he's God. He said that. Evan Thomas, senior editor or senior political correspondent for Newsweek magazine, said he's God. He also then later said he's the teacher telling the other nations, don't fight, children. Right? This is what they see. They see that the world is made evil by people who think, because thinking is bigotry, by the xenophobe and the homophobe and the Islamophobe and the misogynist and so if the really nice people can just get them out of power, take away all their power, just anesthetize them with stupidity, make them 5-year-old children. They'll take care of us, mommy and daddy. In fact, I think, and I haven't seen the quote, but last night somebody told me when I was talking to them about this, said, Michelle Obama just the other day said that Barack Obama was a good father. He's not my father.
Yeah.
But that's who it benefits. It's going to be the William Ayers and the Howard Zinns.
Well, it's the takes a village mentality.
Yeah, well, absolutely it takes a village, but it's a global
It replaces the parent.
And by the way, that's why they undercut family relationships. It's why they want fatherless homes. It's why they want divorces. It's why they want abortions. It's why they want these things that destroy what's called the social fabric. And if you want to really be frightened, go read Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone.
You mentioned it to me the other day, and we had you on the show with Tony Katz and Kurt Schlichter at CPAC, and that was a lot of fun and a lot of great feedback from that. Well, we also had lunch the other day, and we were chatting about this. And the fact is that we now have Trump in office, and your perspective, and you're very famous, by the way, tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of downloads of He Fights.
Donald Trump is the first wartime president in the culture war.
Yeah.
The left has been fighting this culture war since the first babies born after World War II became the children of the 60s. They've been fighting this since they were blowing up buildings and putting guns to people's heads back in the 60s. They've been fighting it with an attitude learned from Saul Alinsky, that the only thing that matters, there's no humanity that matters, blow people up, kill them, destroy their lives, it doesn't matter, the only thing that matters is power. That's what Saul Alinsky's book is all about. This is how he explains his book. If Machiavelli was the rules for how to keep power, these are the rules for how to get power. The problem is that everybody knows Machiavelli was immoral. Everybody on the left thinks Alinsky is a god. I mean, Barack Obama was an acolyte. Hillary wrote her senior thesis, a hagiography of this man. And that's the problem. It's not like it's just a roadmap for power. It's that the people on the left adore this power-hungry man who actually begins his book with an epitaph to Lucifer. He gives a tip of the hat to Lucifer. It says, and here's, this is not exactly right, but it's to Lucifer, the first radical of all. Well, you know what? He's exactly right, that if you don't care about morality, all you care is about radicalism, then Lucifer's your guy.
And he cut his chops being a criminal. He figured out a way to steal meals from restaurants, right? And he taught everybody how to do this.
Yeah, the whole thing is about criminality. And, in fact, one of the lines that is so essential, Barack Obama was a community organizer. That sounds so wonderful. He organized the community. His job as a community organizer, and I'm going to get this as close to a perfect quote as I can, was to rub raw the wounds of grievance. All right? In other words, and this is what he did when he became president. He didn't suddenly stop being a liberal. He didn't stop being a community organizer. He had the same things. He just went to the bully pulpit and used the greater form to rub raw the wounds of grievance, which is why every time there was any opportunity to promote a racial grievance, they were all lies, by the way. They all turned out to be lies, whether it was Henry Gates, Michael Brown was an out-and-out lie that they...
Hands up, don't shoot.
His hands weren't up.
Right.
It's an out-and-out lie. He tried to kill a cop, and the cop shot him first.
Yep.
All right. It's an out-and-out lie, and even after it was long known it was a lie, even after Eric Holder said the cop did nothing wrong, Hillary Clinton still used Michael Brown's mother as a prop at the Democratic National Convention. You know what? If your wounds of grievances are rubbed raw, if you are continually being told, I think somebody else made this point, on the one hand, if you're a man, that your masculinity is toxic. If you have all of these things that the left has done to various people to make them feel aggrieved, it's not surprising that you're going to have more shootings. It's all the left, all of it.
Yeah. So where we are right now, and again, you occasionally get calls from the White House. You're writing speeches. You are involved.
Yeah, but what pisses me off is they call collect.
Yeah. Is that still a thing?
I don't know. We'll find out when they go, what?
Again, somebody that has made that transition, a la David Horowitz did. You were on the left. Now you're on the... You look at things from a culturally conservative perspective.
But in fairness, let's... go ahead.
Okay. So with that being said, you believe right now that Trump is... What is he doing, do you believe, that will enable our culture to allow that pendulum to swing back a little bit?
Yeah. The left has been trying to manipulate the culture into their vision of utopia. And that has required them to twist themselves into knots and to make up fancy-sounding rhetoric for absolute nonsense. It's really not that hard in this world. It really isn't. Do the right things. Move the embassy to Jerusalem. Of course you do.
Right.
All right. Don't be cowed by violent Islamists who are going to, that's called blackmail. That's called intimidation. Move the embassy to Jerusalem. Of course you do. Lower regulations. Stop trying to manipulate everybody's lives in order to create your utopia. Because you know what, Barack? You're not that smart. You know what, Hillary, you're not that smart.
So what Donald Trump is doing right now is he is fighting this cultural rot, as you refer to it. But these guys aren't walking away. They're not, tucking tail and walking away. They're coming on like a tsunami against him. Do you believe there is sufficient support in this country for? We've got the 2018s coming up. We've got 2020 just around the corner. It'll be here before you know it. Are you concerned at all that the energy on the right is there?
The only thing that concerns me, it's kind of like when the odds of something are very small, but that something is really bad, you're still nervous about it. You got a 10% chance you got cancer. You go, well, 10% is a lot for cancer, really. All right, I'm not worried about the odds, but I'm worried about how horrible it would be if we were to lose. The left is at the point of the end game. They are looking for that one opportunity to push it off. They've been doing it slowly for the past 50 years.
Right.
All right. They've been, there's an expression for it, the long march through the institutions. They've been slowly taking over the institutions and then brainwashing successive generations and getting really close. But you know what? We still have the White House. We still have the Senate. We still have the House of Representatives. We still have the governorships. We still have the state legislatures. We still have the Supreme Court. According to Rasmussen, who's the only one I really have faith in, he's at 50. Yep, he's at 50%.
Yeah.
And it's probably a lot more than that because of the secret Trump vote.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that Hillary lost, and there are a million reasons why Hillary lost, but one of them was people started to get that Obamacare premium in the mail.
Yes.
And they held in their hand the fact that they were liars.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what people are going to see with these tax breaks, these tax cuts. They're going to see in their hand, Nancy Pelosi lied and said it's only for the rich. And they're going to look in their hand and go, no. Yeah. They've already seen bonuses from their companies.
Okay.
They have seen payroll. I know that.
So you're optimistic.
In my home, I'm extremely, you know how optimistic I am? I think we're going to be the governor of California.
Really?
Yep.
What did you think of Trump's, who was it, John Cox?
Yep. The right man.
You like John Cox?
I really hate to get into this thing because I rely on the general public to be my fans, and there's this divide right now. And we saw a lot of the never Trumpers and the internecine fighting that happened because of the Trump never Trumpers.
Right.
But nonetheless, Cox is the grown up in the room. Cox is the mature one.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
You've met Travis Allen.
Yes,
I was at that same event you were a few months ago. And so I'm seeing a big fight right now, especially on social media, amongst the right, between Cox and Allen.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
and it's unfortunate because it's
two top primary is that's what's scary here.
It
so
is
you
scary.
split that vote.
I don't think that's going to happen. I think one of them is going to come in second, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be Cox. And at that point, the question is: are they going to be never Coxers, like people who were never Trumpers, or are you going to help us win? That's what the question's going to be.
Yeah, it's a little disconcerting right now because I'm starting to see the same encampments that you had in the Trump election.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The never
And that's
Trumpers
where you
and the
split
Trumpers.
it.
Right. The good news is, in the end, on Election Day, the Republicans came home. Republicans voted Republican. Even the never Trumpers voted Republican.
Right.
And what's really...
But you need to get them into the top two.
Right. That is the thing, and
right?
I do think...
So the Democrats have a problem as well. They've got 5 or 6 people, so they can split their vote.
Right.
And there was an article today, I think, in one of the newspapers, LA Times or whatever it was, that Democrats are starting to get really concerned about that
Very
for the
concerned.
California race.
Very concerned.
But conservatives need to, console around whoever they're...
Right, but come election day, come primaries, we're going to be in the top 2.
You can't disclose the title of your book. Any idea when it's going to be coming out?
We're talking mid-August, let's say.
And you can still be found on Amazon.com, your stand-up, right?
My stand-up is on Amazon Prime.
Amazon Prime,
Amazon Prime, Evan Sayet, A Deplorable Mind.
Yeah.
My book, The Kindergarten of Eden, How the Modern Liberal Thinks, is still a bestseller.
And you're all over social media, Facebook, Twitter.
I'm everywhere.
Evan Sayet, folks. Look him up and appreciate it. Thank you,
Always.
my friend.
My pleasure.
All right, thanks. I'm here with Mark Tapson, the writer for the David Horowitz Freedom Center and culture critic. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you being here. So as we're talking about 2A, we're talking about gun violence. I know that you're here talking today at this confab. Illustrate a little bit about more what you've been talking to all of our wonderful guests about today.
Well, one of the previous speakers, Dr. Warren Farrell, who
Yes.
writes a lot about the war on boys, he spoke earlier, just prior to lunch, just prior to my speech, and he spoke about the war on boys and that aspect of it, and I branched off that a little bit. I spoke about how I've been writing a lot recently, in recent years, about the so-called war on masculinity,
Okay.
which is sort of the tip of the spear, actually, of cultural Marxism, because this war on masculinity, what it essentially is a subversive campaign to eradicate traditional notions of masculinity. Because once you've done that, once you cast doubt on notions of gender and traditional gender roles, once you start tearing that down, it becomes easier to deconstruct the culture in ways that you want to. It becomes easier to deconstruct the family, the so-called patriarchy.
Right.
And cultural Marxism, the aim of it is essentially to apply Marxist goals to the cultural arena as opposed to the economic arena, where Marxism doesn't work very well.
Right.
But it works very well in the cultural arena.
Right, right.
So this war on masculinity has been an ongoing issue for decades, and it's really undermining the sense that boys and men have of what their real nature is. And it ties in with this whole school shootings conference in the sense that what I wanted to highlight was that in the aftermath of some of these school shootings, most specifically the Parkland, Florida school shooting, there's a lot of discussion in the media about so-called toxic masculinity. So this phrase toxic masculinity has really sort of become almost a household buzz phrase now. It's being talked about a lot, and the upshot of it is that there's something about masculine nature that is essentially poisonous and broken, and that we have to fix it. And the way that it is suggested we fix it is to deconstruct masculinity and get men to act more like stereotypical women, more nurturing, less aggressive. And so my emphasis was, in my speech, was that in all this talk about toxic masculinity, the culture and the media are often overlooking what I call the antidote to toxic masculinity, which is chivalry. And when I bring up the word chivalry, people don't quite know what to make of it. I literally just finished writing a book about chivalry, just turned it into the publisher. And I usually write about fairly serious things, the intersection of pop culture and politics. And so when I told people I was writing a book about chivalry, they're a little bit taken aback, because 10 times out of 10, you ask people what they think about chivalry, and they say it has to do with opening a door for a woman, or manners and courtesy.
Right.
That's certainly part of it, but my focus on it is about chivalry as a sort of code of masculine ethics, a code of male ethics.
So toxic masculinity, as we were talking about, we're seeing this push now from the left. And
Yes.
It's almost an attack line, right? That if you are an alpha male, for example, toxic. I mean, we see this coming from Jordan Peterson. I've had discussions with Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens on this. We had David Horowitz on our show. We talk about this push where it's about creating whether it's more empathetic male, but for many people, we're talking about the beta male. How does that impact society? If you see, I mean, don't you need alphas?
Well, that's a good question. If you have boys and young men who are constantly being told through the culture, through cultural messages, that they are broken, that their very nature is poisonous, that they are ticking time bombs of violent rage, when you're constantly assaulting them with these messages, they doubt their own masculinity. They don't know how to be themselves. They think that what they're supposed to do now, like the role model for the modern male now, is to be someone who seems to be narcissistically obsessed with his own feelings. And that's a problem for society, because society needs men to be strong and pillars of stability in times of stress and danger and emergency.
Right.
And this requires no small degree of emotional self-restraint and self-control. And that seems to be what toxic masculinity is aimed at breaking down this notion that men should be strong. The impetus now about toxic masculinity is to get men to be more vulnerable, more emotional, have a good public cry. And that's not really what men are. I mean, studies even show that more emotionality is not how men deal with stress. Men deal with stress through self-control. That's what studies have shown.
So that stress, that self-control that you're talking about, when a male is dealing with crises in their lives, whatever, and everybody has them, you're just this human condition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing is a straight trajectory upwards in your life. You're going to be dealing with setbacks. As a society, and especially in this more feminized approach to society, are we not teaching our men how to deal with those crises now?
Absolutely not. Because the kind of alpha male that you were talking about, and any kind of behavior that is associated with traditional masculinity, it's now deemed out of touch. It's archaic. We don't need that kind of guy anymore. It's just, that's a mask of masculinity that's repressing a man's true self, and it's oppressing outwardly. It's oppressing of women, and so any kind of traditional male behavior, even standing up and even holding a door open for a woman, or
the chivalry you're talking about.
Yeah, that is deemed. In fact, academics call it benevolent sexism, as opposed to hostile sexism, which is rape and wife beating and that sort
benevolent
of thing.
Sexism.
Benevolent sexism.
So it's a good kind of sexism,
well,
but it's not.
Yes, that's the thing. Is it's considered worse than hostile sexism because it's subversive. It's sort of it convinces the woman that the guy is being polite
There's
and
ulterior
gentlemanly.
motives.
Yes, the ulterior motive is that he's pulling some kind of a gender power play on her. So this is why young women now resent having a door open for them, and it's why young men resent the suggestion or the expectation that they should open a door for a woman, because they've been so browbeaten by feminism for 50 years, they don't feel that they owe women anything.
Right.
So chivalry has a bad rap today among men and young men and women. Not so much among older generations who consider it a positive social force, but there is a virulent anger about the word chivalry now. But if men are not taught to stand up when they need to pull it together, to man up, and I know that's a phrase that a lot of people consider to be damaging, to man up or pull yourself together and act like a man. And in certain contexts and with certain boys, that kind of attitude can be damaging. But the fact remains that if a man doesn't know how to man up when the circumstances require it, he suffers for it. More importantly, his loved ones will suffer for it. His community will suffer for it. The country suffers for it, and so on. So you can see this in a more abstract way in the broader sense of the emasculation of Western culture, not just in America but all throughout Europe, at a time when Europe, for example, is being more or less invaded by a hyper-masculinized Islamic culture.
Right.
Under multiculturalism, all cultures are equally fantastic, except Western civilization, which is the fount of all evil and oppression. So multiculturalism is not really multicultural. It's essentially anti-Western.
Yes.
Islamic supremacism is about the farthest thing from being multicultural as you can get.
Right.
Actually, it's actually Western culture that is the most open and inviting and multicultural. But Western culture is painted as oppressive, as colonialist and racist and on and on.
When we talk about, and you refer to Warren Farrell's book, the boy crisis, we talk about the boy crisis. We just saw in the news in the past few weeks that the Boy Scouts are no longer boys, right? You have to have boys and girls. We're seeing high schools around this country. And my son is in high school. I got another one in middle school. They are opening cheerleading now to both men and women. I know we've had Yale leaders or whatever those are, but now it's you can actually be a cheerleader with the whole pom-pom thing. This is what we are doing is intermingling the sexes here, and doesn't this? There is a difference. There is a biological difference. How is this no longer being appreciated or at least in any way acknowledged?
I think most people who have common sense would agree with you on that, and they ask themselves that same question. But the loud minority voices, and by minority voices I mean just the minority of voices that control the culture, are pushing this notion that there is no such biological verity, there's no such biological truth as male and female, or if there is, it's very minor compared to the cultural and social constructions of gender that are on top of that. It's actually, I mean, I personally think that most of these social constructions, as we call them, are based on actual biological gender differences.
Yes.
They weren't just made up in order for men to oppress women.
XY is a biological reality.
Yes, although it's hard, if you try to say that on a college campus now, you'll be drummed off the campus. All this intermingling of these sexes, it's supposedly in the name of gender equality, but it's not about gender equality. It's about the attack on masculinity, because there is no equivalent movement into women's fields. Everything is about breaking down men's organizations and men's groups. Like you mentioned, the Boy Scouts. There are no boys clamoring to get into the Girl Scouts. There are no parents clamoring to open up the Girl Scouts to admit their boy children. Only the Boy Scouts. In fact, if you go to the websites, it's an interesting contrast. You go to the Girl Scouts website, and there are no images of boys anywhere on any page in that website. And there are messages all over it about empowering girls and empowering women, and that's fine. I have no problem with empowering women. I have 3 young daughters myself, and I want to empower the hell out of them. But if you go to the Boy Scouts website, the first thing you see on what they call the splash page, the first image you see is of 2 girls high-fiving each other. Boys are rarely, if at all, mentioned on the Boy Scouts page. There are what they mention is youth or young people, and they show lots of interaction of boys and girls. So there is no equivalent, the assault on the Boy Scouts, there's no equivalent on the Girl Scouts. That's because it's not about gender equality for everybody. It's about tearing down male-oriented institutions.
Boys need a place.
Yes.
And men need a place. We have our poker games and our basketball and whatever it is. Boys need a place, and it's activities, it's physical, it's interests that they have where they can associate with other boys. How damaging do you think this is?
I think it's so damaging that I think it is literally the most important cultural issue that we are facing today. I think if this whole war on masculinity can be resolved, I think so many other problems will fall into place. One of the things the reason I focus on chivalry is that I believe that chivalry is the antidote to toxic masculinity, and also as a code of ethics for boys and young men to follow, because boys need a code. Men need a code. They really need a set of values and a set of standards that will elevate them and empower them and civilize them, for that matter.
Right.
And if you start inculcating that at a young age, then you develop better men. I mean, it's, as the culture critic Camille Paglia says, it's a man's world and always will be. So if that's the case, then if we want a better world, we need better men. And if you want better men, you don't tear down their masculine nature. You don't destroy that. You find ways to empower it and channel it in moral directions, even their capacity for violence. You channel it in a moral and a righteous direction. You make better men. That's how you're going to get a better culture. And if we get better men, so many other cultural things will fall into place. Our families, our broken families will start to mend. Our divided culture, even, I think, will begin to mend. Our waning civilization, all the way up the line. I think if we resolve this war on masculinity, bring back a more of a traditional set of values and virtues, which chivalry provides, then I think our culture is on its way to becoming strong again.
This is such a crucial issue, and it is such an important issue for our times. Mark, I really do appreciate you joining us, and would love to have you back on so we can go into this deeper.
There's so much to say about it. It never ends.
Yeah. So where can folks find you?
I have a website, marktapson.com. I also write regularly for the David Horowitz Freedom Center. They have a website called frontpagemag.com.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. And I write elsewhere, sometimes PJ Media, but
Yeah, on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter as Mark Tapson,
Perfect.
oddly enough. On Facebook as well, Mark Tapson.
Okay.
So
All right. Well, we'll be looking you up. And thank you so much for your time, Mark.
Thanks, my pleasure.
Appreciate it.